my topic this evening, it seemed to me that what was coming to my mind was that in both my life and in Swami Kriyananda's life, one lesson that comes to fore is that we are all divinely guided, moment by moment in our lives. As Swamiji would often say, if we just tentatively reach one hand up towards God, He will enthusiastically lift us up with both of His arms and all of His strength and love. And this is what awaits us if we just open ourselves to that love, to that divine guidance. And so many auspicious things happen, so many doors open, it seems mysteriously, if we offer ourselves. And perhaps we see this for many people very dramatically when they first become acquainted with spiritual things, when they take the first steps on the spiritual path. And perhaps that's because everything is new, a new spiritual discovery, in contrast to our rather mundane lives that we had lived up to that point. And with Swamiji in his life, it almost seemed that as soon as an opportunity presented itself, he was ready to take it. The autobiography of a yogi had been published just a year and a half before Swamiji found it on a bookshelf in New York. And for me also, the catalyst was books, Swami Kriyananda's books. And I found 2 of his books just soon, a few months after they were published. The autobiography of a yogi was published by a small publisher, but a professional publisher. But Swami Kriyananda's books were self-published by himself, and only a handful of copies were available in just a handful of specialty spiritual bookshops up and down the west coast of North America at that time. And somehow those 2 books came to me in the moment that I needed them. And then I remember in preparing myself to go to Ananda village, I stayed for periods of time in several different ashrams. And when Swamiji had just finished writing his Art and Science of Raja Yoga, he gave a copy of the book as a gift to the ashram where I happened to be staying. And they knew at that time of my great interest in Swamiji, and so they gave me the book. And they gave me the book at the moment when I needed it most, when my energy was flagging, when I needed a stronger direction. And this gave me that strong, powerful spiritual direction that I was really seeking in that moment. And so too, the autobiography came to Swamiji only in the moment when he was ready to act on it, when he was free to go across the US and to meet his guru. And his parents probably would have stopped him, but they could not, only at that moment, because they had just left the country. Likewise, when I left Canada to go to California to meet Swamiji, my family would have wanted to stop me, but they were not able to. I was already living on my own in a different city. And so we don't know the mysterious ways of God and what He is calling us to unless we open up and we listen. This is the lesson that we all have in front of us, is that our life gracefully unfolds if we simply allow it to. And not just at the beginning of the spiritual path, but now, day by day, we can have that same openness, that same trust. We need to develop that trust more and more to allow ourselves to go into that divine flow in self-surrender and in acceptance. And we also need to be patient for divine timing. That everything, in looking at Swamiji's life, everything was perfectly in place for him to find the autobiography only in that moment when he did so. A year before I went to Ananda village, I was visiting another ashram. And it didn't feel to me like my spiritual home, but I could see how it might be very helpful for me to live in that ashram long term. And so I arranged to speak to the Swami in charge there and ask her, might it be possible for me to live there? And she said to me, well, you know, it's very difficult right now. We don't have large donors, that even our most senior swamis, they're not able to live here full time. They have to go away during the week and work at regular jobs, and then they can come here on the weekends. But if you were to go away and earn $1,000 and bring that back, that could be your contribution, and then you would be able to live here. A very reasonable request given the circumstances, in fact, a very generous offer on her part. But somehow for me, I just couldn't bring myself to do that. I was a hard worker, but in that moment I felt that somehow I would lose myself spiritually if I went away and did that. It was a very good request, but for me somehow the timing, the place, something just wasn't quite right for me to act on it. And then interestingly enough, a year later, as I got to know Ananda and become firm in my resolve that this indeed was my spiritual path and my spiritual home, I came to learn that Ananda too, things were difficult economically, that there were not outside donors, that Swamiji and the residents there all had to work very hard, earning money, and particularly earning money to make payments on the purchase of the land for the ashram. And one way they found to do that, to help with that, was that when a new member was accepted to join the ashram, that new member would come with the exact amount, $1,000. And when I heard that, my response was very different than it was a year earlier. It was like, well, $1,000, is that all? I mean, I want to give my life to this. You know, what's $1,000? And even though at that time I didn't have that money, in fact, here I was in California, and there was no easy way for me to obtain that money, that I couldn't work legally. I would have to work somehow in a cash-only situation, and that kind of a job was not easy to find. But what happened? As soon as I was clear, as I was resolved in myself that this was the step that I was meant to take, then suddenly newfound friends offered me a place to live in the city of San Francisco, and one of them happened to have a temporary job helping a carpenter, and he was able to get me a job working along with him. And after about 3 months of doing this, someone that I had met at Ananda Village paid me a surprise visit in San Francisco. And she said, you know, you have almost all of that $1,000 saved now, and next week, Swamiji is giving a special week of classes. I think now is the right time for you to leave all this and come and live at Ananda Village. And just come up with me on when I drive up. And that is what I did. And so often, these are how things happen, if we're open to them. And Swamiji, it was September 1948 that he came to his guru, and he described the first months living in the ashram, living with his guru and getting to know his guru on a deeper level. And let me share a little bit of that. Soon after September, Master invited me to 29 Palms, where he said he was planning to go for a period of seclusion. Here it was, over the years, that I accumulated my most precious memories of him. 29 Palms was a location in the desert, a 2-hour drive east of Los Angeles, a very quiet area in the desert. And Master had a retreat there where he would go. It was the most quiet and most isolated place that he would go. And he would do a lot of his writing there as well as meditating. And close by, about 5 miles away, there was another piece of property, and that was where some of the monks would stay. And that was where Swamiji would stay, and he was close to his guru, and he too would have this quiet time in the desert, really for the first time in his life, having such an experience of silence and solitude. And Master would have Swamiji and a couple of the other monks, he would have them come over to his retreat, and he would find jobs that they could do outdoors. Swamiji and one of the other monks, they were the ones who built a swimming pool for Master at that time. And Swamiji later said that maybe Master used the swimming pool only once. It was like it was an excuse for the monks to be close to him. And then after a while, Master would invite Swamiji to come in the house when Master was dictating his books, including his interpretations of the Bhagavad Gita. And in describing the desert, Master says the light here in the desert resembles the astral light. And Swamiji said, over the coming years, I was to spend many months in these tranquil surroundings. And he tells the story of, at one point, Master was dictating the technique of Kriya Yoga. And Swamiji was there listening to every word. And then suddenly Master exclaimed, and he said, "Say, Walter, you haven't had Kriya initiation." "No, sir," I was smiling smugly. He had already dictated enough for me to understand the technique. "Well, in that case, I shall have to initiate you right now. I am sending the divine light through your brain, baptizing you." He said this from where he sat across the room. I immediately felt a divine current irradiating my brain from the spiritual eye. Gradually, as weeks passed, I found my heart opening like a flower under the sun rays of Master's love. More and more, I was coming to appreciate what a blessing it was to have him for my guru. And it was some 24 years after this that I came to Swamiji, also in September, when I came to live at Ananda Village. And for 2 months, Swamiji was very active there, giving satsangs and classes every weekend. And then in the middle of the week, he would give a satsang just for the ashram residents there, to a smaller group. But then in November, he went to India from November until March, as I said, for the first time in 10 years that he had gone to India, and we all missed him very much. And it was in that time when he was away that there grew in me the desire to join the fledgling monastery that was there. And the monastery, the monks lived very close to the home of Swamiji. It was just a minute's walk away from where my new home was to his. And so I knew also that in joining the monastery that I was going to see much more of Swamiji in the years to come. And this is just an example of a golden opportunity, perfect timing, and I only had to give myself to it, to this divine flow. And this is the lesson for all of us, is to look for those divine opportunities in little ways in our daily lives, because they are there for us to uncover. And this is what we are being asked. If we can give ourselves to the spiritual search, we can give ourselves in seva, give all of our energy up to our higher self, up to the divine. Then we see with new eyes these wonderful opportunities before us. That's what I wanted to share with you this evening, and thank you so much for joining me.